American beast tanks arrived later in the war, but their impact was immediate and significant. Earlier, Allied models lacked the flexibility and strength needed for evolving battlefields. As the conflict grew more complex, American designs followed suit, featuring faster production, stronger armor, and improved adaptability. These beast tanks weren't just replacements, they brought a different kind of momentum. From narrow European roads to the thick brush of the Pacific, they proved essential in shifting the tide and giving Allied forces the edge they needed. And in this video, we will show you exactly that. So, buckle up, and let's look at every American deadliest monster tanks used in World War II. M18 Hellcat. This monster tank didn't rely on armor to survive. It wasn't built to absorb punishment. It was built to avoid it entirely. With thin plating and an open turret, it offered little protection, but that was intentional. It was designed for movement above all else. This monster was fast and faster than anything else in its class, and that speed became its best defense. Crews used it to slip behind enemy armor, strike with precision, and disappear before return fire found them. Its 76mm gun wasn't the largest, but placed well, it delivered results. This monster had weaknesses. Its crew was exposed, and its structure couldn't absorb much damage. But in return, it gave its operators something rare: the ability to control the pace of engagement. In a war defined by shifting fronts and unpredictable terrain, that freedom made a difference. It didn't pretend to dominate. It simply moved where others couldn't, and struck where others failed. M10 Wolverine. This monster wasn't built with bold promises. It was a response, quick, practical, and just capable enough to get the job done. Based on the Sherman chassis, this beast carried a 3-inch gun that early on handled most German armor, but everything about it was a trade-off. The turret was open. The armor is thin. It couldn't take much, but it could be there when needed. Crews learned to work around its limits. They'd dig in, stay low, and pick their moments. It wasn't flashy, and it wasn't something you trusted in a slugfest. It showed up early and filled a role that couldn't wait for better options. Even as stronger tanks arrived, the M10 stuck around, passed to other units, other nations. It beast was never a showpiece, but that's not what it was meant to be. In a war that kept changing, the M10 held its ground long enough to matter. M36 Jackson. There came a point when speed wasn't enough. The M10's gun couldn't keep up, and crews knew it. The Jackson monster was the answer: a better turret, a bigger gun, and finally, a reason to believe they could stop what was coming. The 90mm didn't just punch through, it gave distance, space, time to fight back. The rest of the vehicle was still familiar: open-topped, light armor. It didn't make you invincible, but it gave you a chance. In places like the Ardennes, that chance meant everything. Crews weren't charging into battle. They were holding bridges, watching roads, waiting for the sound of tracks in the cold. When it came, they had something that could hit first, and hard. Jackson didn't rewrite how the war was fought, but it changed how those crews felt when they rolled out. For once, they didn't have to hope the enemy blinked first. M4 Sherman. This monster tank became the standard American tank because it matched the reality of the war. It developed from the M3, keeping proven mechanical elements while correcting design limits that restricted combat use. Placing the main gun in a fully rotating turret improved accuracy and made the vehicle more flexible in changing conditions. Engineers focused on reliability, maintenance, and consistency rather than extreme protection or size. This allowed large numbers to be produced quickly and kept operational with basic field repairs. The Sherman appeared across North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific, adapting to very different terrain and combat roles. Early versions performed well against lighter enemy tanks. As opposing armor improved, later models received stronger guns and benefited from coordinated support. The same chassis supported artillery vehicles, tank destroyers, and recovery equipment. While it lacked heavy armor, its availability and dependability kept armored units moving. Its influence came from steady performance rather than technical superiority. M26 Pershing. This monster showed up late, but it was the tank American crews had been needing for years. Against German armor, the Sherman's limits became obvious: thin armor, lighter gun, and too many compromises. The Pershing corrected that. It carried a 90mm cannon, thickened frontal armor, and a lower, more compact shape that made it harder to hit. Inside, space was better used, controls were improved, and protection gave crews a fighting chance. In the final months of combat, Pershings were able to take on Panthers and Tigers without relying on numbers or luck. It didn't just keep up, it held its ground and returned fire with confidence. The war was nearly over, but the Pershing showed what American tank design could be when given time and focus. It wasn't rushed, and it didn't pretend to do everything. It did what needed doing, and for once, that was more than enough. M3 Stuart. The M3 Stuart never matched German tanks in weight or firepower, but it wasn't built for that. It was small, light, and dependable, able to move fast, cover ground, and keep running in rough conditions. Its 37mm gun was useful early in the war, but quickly became outmatched. Even so, the Stuart stayed in the fight by doing what heavier tanks couldn't: scouting ahead, flanking through narrow terrain, and staying mobile when others stalled. In North Africa, it outran most threats. In the Pacific, it climbed through jungle paths and broken roads without slowing down. Its crews understood its limits and worked around them, focusing on speed, positioning, and awareness. It couldn't absorb heavy hits, but it often avoided them altogether. The Stuart wasn't built to dominate. It was built to last just long enough, in the right place, at the right time. And more often than not, that was enough. LVT, Landing Vehicle Tracked. The LVT wasn't a tank in form, but on Pacific beaches, it carried the same weight. First designed to haul supplies across swamps, it evolved into something far more critical once amphibious assaults became the focus. It could swim to shore, crawl across reefs, and roll through soft sand that stopped traditional vehicles cold. The early versions were open and vulnerable, used mostly for transport. But as the fighting intensified, armor and weapons were added, turning them into frontline machines. In operations across Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, they weren't just delivery vehicles. They were part of the assault. LVTs brought troops into the fire and kept moving when landing craft faltered. They couldn't match tanks in armor or firepower, but they reached places no tank could. Without them, entire landings would have collapsed before they started. The LVT didn't replace tanks. It gave them the foothold they needed to arrive at all. M24 Chaffee, the M24. Chaffee didn't arrive with force. It showed up with answers. By the time it reached the front, crews were used to light tanks that could move fast but couldn't hit hard or take much in return. Chaffee fixed that. Its 75mm gun gave it enough bite to support infantry or handle enemy vehicles when needed. The ride was smoother, the frame tighter, and the controls more forgiving. It wasn't made to trade blows. It was made to get there first, stay light on its feet, and still hold its own. In Europe, it came late, but every crew that used it felt the step up. In Korea, it wasn't built for duels, but it still found ways to matter. Fast, quiet, reliable. The Chaffee didn't try to be what it wasn't. It filled a role the others couldn't. And in a war where movement meant survival, that was enough. M8 Howitzer Motor Carriage. The M8 wasn't built for attention. It just needed to be there when the infantry got stuck. Mounted on the familiar Stuart chassis, it carried a short 75mm howitzer, enough to take out dug-in machine guns or stubborn roadblocks without calling for bigger guns. It wasn't made to hold the line or trade fire. It showed up, fired fast, and moved on. In tight villages, woods, or broken roads, it followed infantry where heavier support couldn't go. Crews understood its limits, but they relied on it anyway. If the advance slowed, the M8 helped clear a path without delay. It didn't need armor to do that. It just needed to be close, steady, and ready. Some vehicles turned the tide. This one kept it flowing. When things jammed up, the M8 was often the reason they didn't stay that way for long. And that mattered more than firepower on paper ever could. M12 Gun Motor Carriage. The M12 did one thing well, knocked out what refused to budge. It wasn't built to move fast or take hits. It just needed to get close enough, set up quickly, and let the 155mm gun do the rest. Bunkers, stone walls, and bridges didn't last long once it opened up. Its crew worked exposed, in an open-top hull, knowing that speed and timing were their only cover. But when it fired, everything stopped. Infantry moved up, tanks pressed forward, and obstacles that once stalled entire columns disappeared. It wasn't elegant. It didn't look like much, but it kept the momentum going when nothing else could. Across France and into Germany, the M12 did its work quietly from behind the front. It wasn't there to lead. It was there to clear the way so others could. And without it, many of those hard-won advances would have been a lot harder to win. T-28 Super Heavy Tank. These T-28 wasn't meant to maneuver. It was meant to endure. Nearly 100 tons of armor with no turret and little speed, it was built to break through fixed defenses, the kind that stopped everything else. The 105mm gun it carried could punch through concrete, and its armor could shrug off most known weapons. But by the time it was ready, the kind of war it was built for had already passed. The Siegfried Line was no longer the main fight, and mobility mattered more than raw protection. Only 2 were ever completed. They never fired a shot in combat. Still, the T-28 stood as a reminder of what kind of machines the war nearly required. It wasn't designed to support infantry or flank a position. It was there to absorb punishment and push through when no one else could. Even unfinished, it showed just how far armor was willing to go. M32 Tank Recovery Vehicle. The M32 didn't need to fight. Its job was pulling others back from the edge. Based on the Sherman, it traded its gun for a crane, winch, and tools built for one thing: getting damaged tanks out of places they weren't supposed to be. When machines broke down under fire or got hit too far forward, the M32 came rolling in while the dust was still settling. Its crews worked fast and quietly, often under threat to recover what could be saved. It wasn't flashy. It didn't lead charges. But without it, armored units couldn't keep going. No replacements were waiting. A tank left behind was a tank lost. The M32 kept that from happening. In every advance, it followed closely, waiting for the next wreck to drag back to life. It didn't win battles, but it made sure the ones that did had a chance to keep fighting. M6 Heavy Tank. The M6 was designed with the idea that bigger meant better. It had heavy armor, 2 guns, and more bulk than any American tank before it. But by the time it was ready, the battlefield had changed. Speed, production, and adaptability mattered more than size. The M6 was hard to transport, slow to operate, and didn't fit into the kind of war being fought overseas. Crews favored the Sherman for its simplicity and availability. Only a few M6 were ever completed, and none saw combat. Still, the design wasn't wasted. It revealed the limits of over-engineering and helped shift priorities. Rather than building giant machines for narrow missions, the focus turned toward what could be mass-produced and fielded under pressure. The M6 faded quietly, but the lesson it left behind was loud enough. In modern war, strength isn't measured in weight. It's measured in what actually moves forward when everything else stops. M7 Priest. The M7 Priest didn't break through enemy lines, but it helped others do exactly that. Built on a Sherman chassis, it carried a 105mm howitzer and followed closely behind the front, ready to fire when called. Its open top wasn't a weakness. It gave the crew space to load and adjust quickly, even under pressure. It wasn't meant to fight, face to face. Its job was to stay mobile, stay steady, and give fire support that kept advances from stalling. Whether it was clearing obstacles, halting counterattacks, or covering vulnerable infantry, the Priest delivered. It didn't need armor like a tank or speed like a scout. It needed to be where artillery usually couldn't go, close. Across Europe, it filled that role without hesitation. It never took the spotlight, but it never sat idle either. The M7 reminded everyone that firepower isn't only about range, it's also about being ready when the moment demands it. M22 Locust. The M22 Locust wasn't built to dominate, just to arrive first. It was light enough to be flown across enemy lines and dropped into battle with airborne troops. That concept alone made it unusual. The armor was thin, and the gun wasn't enough against most tanks, but the mission wasn't to hold ground. It was to give paratroopers a chance when they landed. In Operation Varsity, British forces used the Locust in limited numbers. It struggled. Rough landings caused damage, and enemy resistance exposed its limits. Still, the attempt meant something. The M22 wasn't a success in combat, but it forced a new question. Could armor be part of airborne war? Its service was short, and results were mixed, but it wasn't a dead end. It showed that mobility could take new forms, and that even a small tank, in the right place at the right time, might one day make all the difference. What do you think about these deadliest tanks? Well, let us know in the comments below. We hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, then like, share, and subscribe. We'll catch you very soon.